Welcome back to the Class Zero Soldiers podcast. I'm your host, Zero, and as always, joined by my good buddy Soldier. How's it going, Soldier?
Hey Zero, I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Just enjoying my Switch 2 here that you wouldn't know anything about. Is that right?
That is correct. I ended up, what's the word? Chickening, I think? Or better said, adulting because of my finances. And I decided to cancel my pre order a day before release.
It's called being a coward.
Adulting can be cowardice. You're right. Yeah.
It takes a
Easy.
real man to blow his finances on hobbies instead of things that are actually important.
Yeah. Yeah, I just couldn't do it. But it was nice to see you and support you and your friend who were getting one on launch night. That was fun. That was fun.
That was a fun experience. Like I haven't felt like I literally felt like a kid again with that midnight launch. That was so cool.
It was nice. Everybody was really, jovial and courteous and nothing too crazy getting it, and
Yeah. They were a little slow letting people in once 9 o'clock hit because we're on the West Coast. But outside of that, that's like the only real complaint I had. Like everybody that was there kind of knew if they were getting one or not. So like they had just to kind of go over the event and how they handled it. I think that's important to talk about. I guess we'll start with that, right?
Yeah.
So there was two lines outside of the Best Buy. We arrived, I want to say around 6 because we were trying to get Afro a Switch 2 because Walmart canceled our pre-order. They are a complete joke of a company, and their entire online system and support system is laughable at best. But I will not waste any more of my breath talking about such an awful, awful company. And I only pre-ordered there out of necessity, but hey, it is what it is. But yeah, so we showed up a little early. We got there a little after 6 p.m., I believe. And there was two lines. They had one line for people that already pre-ordered one online through bestbuy.com or the app, and a separate line for people that were trying to get some of the extra allocations they had just for launch day. So if you hadn't heard, a lot of stores had extra stock on hand outside of pre-orders that sold out to, sell to anybody that showed up for the midnight launch. And we're not talking handfuls of consoles. Best Buy, I believe they say they had like 250 extra consoles or 200. I think it was exactly 200. I believe they said they had 100 of the bundle and 100 of the console itself. Does that sound right?
Yeah, that does sound right. I know Costco had a really small number. I think theirs was 40. Each store got 40.
Yeah. But I mean, that makes sense though. You have to be a member to even go in and shop there. So.
Yep.
Yeah.
But they had that good deal on the Pro Controller you got a hold of.
Oh, absolutely. And it's the only reason I even got it. Costco, I don't know if they're probably still selling it this way, but it was $74.99 instead of the $84.99.
You got it for a good deal. But anyway, yeah, they had two lines, one for pre-orders, one for if you're just walking in, and they separated them that way. And they also only allowed, I think, just a few from each line as they started releasing the console, and they didn't just let everybody in.
No, it wasn't like a Black Friday situation, and it was a little slow getting people checked out because they were doing them 2 or 3 at a time, and they had a decent they had a good I want to say 10 people total there working for that. So it's not like they only had 2 guys checking out or anything. So it was just weird how slow it was, but I did like how they had everything organized. So once you were let in the store, the little pop-up shelves, I don't know what to call those little small shelves that you could just move everywhere. They had a couple of those next to the registers. So while you were in line waiting to check out, you could look at accessories, amiibos, games, all the Switch 2 stuff was right there. So you could, pick anything up. Even if you were just picking up a pre-order, you could also buy additional stuff that was there. So I was able to get a couple amiibos from that. And, if you wanted to buy your SD Express card, they had those there as well. But it was a cool experience. We brought our portable monitor and we were playing some games on the Switch as kind of a send off to the Nintendo Switch while we were waiting in line. So it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed the the midnight launch experience, especially because it wasn't actually midnight when we got to get our Switch 2s. Thanks, East Coast.
Yeah, that was a perk.
Let's talk about the Switch 2, right? Like, this is our first episode. Since it came out, I'm gonna give you my review on the console. I think I have enough hours with it to give a firm score. And you can give your first impressions. So we're gonna do both in the same episode, since you don't actually own one, but you did get some hands-on time with it. I think it'll be fun to kind of contrast what your first impressions were versus what my experience has been, having played way too many hours on this thing since it came out. So let's start on that. So for the Switch 2, what do you think about the build quality? What were your impressions of the build quality? And feel free to talk about some of the accessories too. I know we got some GameCube controllers and the Switch Pro 2 controller as well.
All right, yeah. So the build quality, fantastic. I really like how it feels. I like that it's more akin to the recent Switch that came out, which is the OLED model. It really felt like holding an OLED. I don't know much about the kickstand, so I'll have to ask you about that. I've seen it, retract
It's good.
once, but it
It's
looks
good. It's a very good.
strong and sturdy compared to the first gen Switch, of course.
Oh yeah.
And no, I just like the way it feels. I like the larger size Joy-Cons, although
Yes.
I don't know how I feel about how large the device is. So, me personally, I am someone who owns a Switch Lite, and obviously, I like smaller handheld devices in general, even though I do own like a DSi XL and I do own a Steam Deck. I feel like those are they have their compromises, but it's worth it. And with Switch 2, that's something that caught me off guard. I just wasn't really prepared for it, considering it's just so much larger. But not in it's not a negative. It's just more of a preference. And for me, it's like, okay, cool. Well, then that's the size of the new console, and I had no idea. I'm like, well, hey, at least they gave us a big screen, even though we didn't get OLED.
Yeah. No, that's totally fair. And one thing that did surprise me when I first, got to hold it in my hand is, yeah, it is significantly bigger than the Switch. And, you know, we're probably going to get a Switch 2 Lite at some point, and I think we'll get a lot more value out of a Lite console of the Switch 2 than we did with the Switch Lite. Because the Switch Lite, it did provide a lot of value just in the fact that it was smaller and it was unibody, so it felt sturdy in the hands and didn't have like the Joy-Con issues with the attachment with the rails. So even though we're not going to get that, I think just the stark difference in size of whatever the eventual Switch 2 Lite has will definitely be more up your alley in terms of the portability factor. And hopefully this time they allow it to dock. Like if they just make it smaller with its own like mini dock or something, I'd be really really happy about that. But it's a bigger screen, but it doesn't feel heavier. That's what I'm really grateful for. Like I've had tons of extended gaming sessions and it hasn't like felt cumbersome. It's thinner, well, I don't want to say thinner. It's the same thinness as the original Switch. It just has that same like side profile, but it doesn't feel as dense. So like it doesn't feel like it's weighing you down, even though it is significantly bigger.
Yeah, the lightness is important, and the console's pretty thin. I can't say it's much bigger than the standard Switch. It's awesome what they were able to pack in, just to that keeping that form factor, keeping that aesthetic that is Nintendo. It really does seem like, man, thank goodness the Switch was as much of a success as it was for
Yes,
this to be released, because yeah, they just knocked it out. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, absolutely. This is the blueprint of what I want every Nintendo console to basically be from now on. Like, I think they've hit the right formula of, being the all-in-one console of portable as well as the, TV experience. And one of the greatest things, I don't know if it was here that we talked about it on the podcast or if it's just something we said offline, but we kind of take for granted the magic of the original Switch just working, where as soon as you put it in the dock, less than 2 seconds, and boom, that image is on your TV screen. It's already transitioned to the higher power profile from 720p target to 1080p target for most games. And it just worked. And then if you're ready to take it up to go, you pick it up out of the dock, and there was no delay. Boom, right there on the Switch's screen, you are ready to continue playing. So like that was one thing that they really nailed the first time around, is of just the seamlessness of taking it on and off the dock. And they basically improved everything else around it while keeping that with the Switch 2. So I just wanted to throw that out there, that like they kind of got the build down with the prototype, and just really that's what the Switch 2 is. It's just a significantly better Switch 1. Let's talk about the screen next, because I know there's a lot of contention about this. You and I have been talking a little bit offline about some of the controversy with the Switch 2 screen. In case you've been living under a rock, it is a 1080p, 7.9-inch LCD screen that supports both VRR via NVIDIA's G-Sync, as well as HDR. Before we get into the controversy, I'll just talk about my experience with the screen. It's not OLED, and initially that was a letdown, but then once I got to see it in person, I wasn't really worried about the OLED portion of things. It looks really good. It's a very vibrant screen. The colors just pop on it. It's one of the best looking LCDs I've seen, and it is definitely better than the original 2017 Switch screen. And I'd say it's probably better than the V2 version as well of the LCD screen, where they did make them a little brighter and tone, change a little bit different manufacturing process for those. But I'm happy with it. It's a little, well, I think I'll hold the rest of my thoughts for later, because they kind of belong in another section. But what was your first impressions of the screen?
I thought it was pretty good. I remember the first time I saw it, obviously I was like, wow, it's massive. But then looking at the quality of it, I did notice, like, obviously the viewing angles aren't going to be as good, but that's just how LCDs are. But at the same time, it's still high quality IPS. Like, I would say it's very similar to like a PS Portal in terms of quality. Like, that one has really high quality, even though it's not an OLED. Me personally, yeah, I think it's more on the cooler side, which I prefer, but I know some people might like a bit warmer colors, and it seems like the one you got, at least, I don't know what their, how they quality control their pipeline manufacturing for the screens, but maybe most of them are cold. I don't know. I'd have to research a bit, but
Yeah.
I like that. I prefer it more. If I had it, I'm sure I'd be fine with it. But yeah, there's a lot to unpack with the screen, just because Digital Foundry, just, if you don't know, if you're listening and you
Tore him a
don't know
new one.
about it, they definitely took their time and piecemealed their opinions on the screen, and
Yeah.
there are some valid things to that they brought up and people have tried, but at the end of the day, it is a preference thing, right? I personally think that Nintendo wanted to, they heard the fans. They're like, hey, we want a screen, we want we want a Nintendo console that we can play at home, that can work on my 4K TV, that can do HDR, that can do everything like docked wise. We've wanted a more powerful docked Switch for such a long time that I feel like that was kind of their main focus here. It's not that they don't care about the portability, but they want to be able to have a console that meets all these standard specifications that have been met by Xbox and PlayStation since 2014, 2017. So it's like, it's been a long time. So it's cool to see 4K, to see, those are the things I'm excited about. See HDR. Wow, it looks amazing. See how much, crisper and faster things are when you dock it. Now, when it comes to the portability, yeah, sure. It doesn't seem like there's as much thought as, I just feel like you have to choose one or the other right now, at least where Nintendo stands, and that's okay.
And it costs. That's a big
Yeah,
factor
it's
too.
a
We have to
cost.
remember that they were trying to keep this under $500. So like a lot of the things that we're complaining about with regards to the console of what we think they could have done better, all of those, if they had done them, would have made the system cost like $600.
Exactly. They couldn't just give us an OLED off the bat and then expect
No.
it to just be affordable. And it's like, no, they're trying to get these things into homes, into families' homes, into,
Exactly.
and
You and me, we would pay $600 right off the bat for a day one OLED Switch 2.
oh yeah,
But we are not the target audience that Nintendo is trying to get with the Switch 2. It's, you know, relatively supposed to be kind of the, whether it's fair or not, they have the moniker of being the value brand for gaming, where they're the budget brand. Not value as in like knockoff, but like value as in they're generally the cheaper option compared to the competitors. So it's easier to buy for kids versus getting them a PS5 Pro or an Xbox Series X and things like that. So it's like they do have to keep that in mind, that like those premium features would have priced out a lot of the general public that would have bought it day one. So yeah, I mean, everything you said, I fully agree with. I think the portable experience is good enough for right now, and while also giving them an obvious path for an upgrade or a revision 2 years from now. And I mean, there's no doubt that there's going to be a better version of this, and it's going to fix a lot of the things that we don't like. But speaking of, we do need to talk a little bit about some of the things Digital Foundry pointed out. I did watch their review. I haven't liked their coverage of the Switch 2 pre-release. It just felt they were like trying to like save face because of how much they severely underestimated the console. I will admit that before the Switch 2 was revealed, I agreed with Digital Foundry in predicting that there's no way Nintendo is going to go to a 1080p screen. That wouldn't make sense. The amount of power required to make games, hit that target consistently would not be feasible in a $350 console or whatever they would target. And also, it would mess up backwards compatibility with Switch 1 games. So they were very adamant, as was I. I was like, I don't even want them to go to 1080p. Just give us more consistent frame rates. But the Mad Lads actually did it. They made, not only is it 1080p, but it supports up to 120 frames a second, which we don't have any games that do that yet. But Metroid Prime 4 is around the corner. And, it might be one of the... Oh, I'm sorry. I think Fast Fusion just updated the game with their pure mode. I don't know if they added the 120 hertz mode, but that is going to be in all likelihood the first game that supports 120 frames a second. I know Welcome Tour has like a mini game that demos what 120 frames a second looks like, but I don't really count that because it's not like you can play the whole game that way.
yeah.
But yeah, so it's a really high end screen in terms of the specs. My only real complaint about the screen, and you mentioned the color tone, I think mine's definitely on the warmer side comparatively. A
Oh,
lot of people are saying it's definitely more cool toned, but
mhm.
I think mine's a lot closer to neutral, or even more on the warm side of things. But my issue is HDR. HDR is probably the biggest letdown of the Switch 2. You could even say in docked mode as well, it's an issue, but that's for different reasons. But
Right.
in terms of the actual screen itself with HDR and portable, we're going to talk about that first. It is a massive letdown. The screen doesn't get bright enough for HDR to really pop. It's I think the max brightness is like 450 nits or so, which isn't bad for a portable electronic. Let's be clear, most laptops only get up to like 3 to 400 nits of brightness. So, in terms of just being able to see the device, that's more than enough for that. But to really have an HDR experience, you do need to push upwards of 600 plus nits for it to show. So like it may as well not exist in portable mode as far as I'm concerned with the HDR. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I haven't seen it in, person, like HDR on the portable screen, but just judging from, the HDR that falls short from expectation, considering how far along we've come in HDR tech. But it's Nintendo's first shot at it, right? Like they haven't done HDR at all. And to do it on a screen that doesn't get nearly as bright, it's going to have some challenges. Maybe there's revisions that physically help out. There's certainly going to be patches that help out with the docked HDR experience. As soon as those come out, I'm sure we'll hear about it. But until then, yeah, portably, it's not. You're someone who has a Steam Deck OLED, so you can actually speak to what it's like having a portable HDR. I don't know what that's like. I don't think the first generation Steam Deck has HDR portably, does it? I don't think so.
I don't think so either. In fact, even I'm trying to even think. I don't know if I've actually played an HDR game on the Steam Deck OLED. So that's interesting. I mean, I technically do have a device to compare it to, but I don't know. Maybe it's just I haven't noticed it using HDR on the Steam Deck OLED. Steam Deck OLED is a beautiful screen, by the way. I love the Steam Deck OLED display. And, to this day, I think it's still the best screen in a portable gaming device that we have. It's 800p.
Yeah.
It is OLED. It does have actual HDR, and it's up to 90 hertz, which
Yeah.
it's not the 120 of the Switch 2. That's the one thing the Switch 2 has as a feather in its cap. But even 90 hertz over 60 is still a noticeable difference.
Oh yes, yes, it's a huge difference. I wish that was the new standard for Apple phones. I know that's a whole different topic, but I just wish 90 hertz
Yeah.
was adopted in
Let's talk about that for a second. You just
yeah,
mentioned the iPhones.
yeah,
You're spending $830 for a brand new iPhone
yeah,
and still can't get 90 to 120 hertz. But
yeah.
Nintendo found a way to get a 120 hertz screen in a $450 device. Just throwing that out there for everybody complaining
Yeah,
about the screen. Like,
perspective.
we
Yeah,
need perspective on that.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's a sad reality, but that's what it is, unfortunately, and at the same time, I see it as this is this version of the Switch 2,
Yep,
we
it's the day
know.
one version.
Yeah, we know how it goes. Think about the PlayStation. Sony's the same way with the PlayStation. So it's
Yep,
like you're going to get the first one, and then you're going to get revisions that are very quiet. And,
run more efficiently, draw less
right.
power, or are less loud, and in some cases, maybe run games a little better.
Yes, that's a very good point, and that's where the consumer wins in those points. Obviously, it's for them to save a bit more money in order to manufacture more of them faster. So I get that, but then also technology might change. They're gathering a lot of information, so they're going to take all of that info and produce a revision or a because we got the red box Switch. I remember you switched to that as soon as it released, just because of the better battery life. Because it got the
Oh, it was a massive difference. It
more,
was like
more power efficient.
almost double compared to the
Yeah,
original Switch, and it did get brighter. It went from like 400
yeah,
nits to 500.
that's true. That's true. Yeah, that was a really good buy. And what was great was I think that one only came out like a year or two after the original release. So it's not like
Yeah,
we
it
waited
wasn't
too long.
long.
No. And so here's my take. I think that before the 2 year mark, we're going to see a revision. Maybe we'll see a revision so that it's a more power efficient chip. Maybe it does have better battery life. Maybe the screen gets little tweaks here and there, right? And then maybe we see even an OLED model come out way sooner than it did last time for us, just because they actually have something going on. This is a huge.
They got that deal with Samsung for them screens, so
That's
they may already be working on it.
You're right. Yeah, I actually didn't know that. Okay, interesting. Yeah, well, I mean, the screen qualities aren't bad. It's something that
Hmm.
after release they can tweak with software and all of that. I
Yeah,
know that can only go so far, but in general, people are enjoying, it seems like, just the upgrades and whatnot. And of course, the shiny new thing, how people are with just anything that's new.
the
Um,
honeymoon period.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's funny to see. I'm a Reddit monger, so I just go on there and I just look around, and I'm like, people posting about it like it's Christmas. They're like, "Hey guys, I got it," and I'm just like,
It does feel like Christmas.
I'm like, oh man, and I'm sure it does feel like Christmas, and they feel like a kid again. A friend of mine, she actually she used to game with
Used
her
to.
boyfriend,
Oh.
and he passed away unfortunately last year. So
Oh.
um, she wanted to get a Switch too, and he was a big Nintendo fan, and he loved like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. They actually clocked in like 800 hours into Breath, and I believe
Wow.
Tears was like 500 or 600 for them, and they were just like
That's a
big.
lot of time for those games.
They played it a lot, but she got it. She got the Switch too, and she, even though he's not here with us, she got the Switch too, and she was just so excited. She was like, I feel like I had to do it for him, like just to get it, because I know that he would have wanted it on the day one, or
Oh.
first month or whatever. And it was just so sweet to hear, and a little bit of a happy turnout for her to kind of get into Mario Kart World and play around a bit. But yeah, man, games can be pretty fulfilling, and hopefully this launch trajectory continues on the upper side of it. I know we got that really cool Bonanza Donkey Kong.
Oh
Uh,
man.
that was an awesome reveal to know that, um, you know, that we're gonna have a companion character. I was really surprised. What did you think of that?
Oh man. So I'm gonna save my thoughts for later because we'll
Okay.
definitely have a big section about Donkey Kong when we start talking about the games. But it was definitely one of the best game specific directs Nintendo has done, and a complete 180 from what they did with that really lackluster waste of time Mario Kart direct, where they didn't really show us anything new. So I'm glad they blew expectations out of the water for that. But going back to the Switch 2 screen, we do have to talk about the other piece that Digital Foundry brought up, and some people are making a big hullabaloo about it online. And I am pretty sensitive to like visual things and visual deformities. But one thing that was noted as being a uh, I don't know how to even phrase it, like an issue with the Switch 2 screen is the very low response time and the ghosting that can occur because of it. So people are reporting that there's a lot of ghosting that wasn't present on any of the other Switch devices. And people do tests online and found that on in a game in 60 hertz, the response time is like 33 milliseconds, which basically means it's already fully loaded the next frame and the previous frame is still on the screen. So you get that like lag, that ghosted image. And I'll be honest with you, man, I could not see it with just looking for it on the naked eye. I had to really like record a slow mo video, which is the only way Digital Foundry was able to show it too. They had to slow it to
Yeah.
like 11% to get it to be shown. And it's like, oh, okay, I guess that is there. But like in normal gameplay, you don't really notice it. I guess for people that play like 2D platformers, maybe it's a little more obvious there, but
The
it
2D.
really isn't something
Yeah.
that has hindered my experience in any way, shape, or form. Uh, just to put some context to it, I guess the original Switch LCD had a response time of about 21 seconds. So it's about 50% worse than the original Switch one. And nobody even mentioned this when the Switch came out about the ghosting issue. And it's not nearly as bad as other consoles. Like the PSP was infamous for having a really poor response time on their LCDs as well. And of course, you and I have both talked about this. The original DMG Game Boy, I don't even know if that can be measured in milliseconds. We're talking like fractions of a whole second at that point because it was bad. So, I mean, thankfully, it's not that bad. It's not Game Boy levels of blurriness and fuzziness. But yeah, man, what do you think about this? To me, it just seems like a non-issue, and it sounds like something that they can fix with an update. I guess it's not using overdrive currently for its LCD, which is what a lot of monitors do to get faster response times from LCDs.
Yeah, hmm. I think it's something that could be patched. I mean, here's the thing. It's a 120 hertz panel, right?
Right?
and it doesn't get as bright. And so it's almost like there's just some things about the screen they used in particular that have, it's got the higher resolution for 1080p. That's great. But, you know, maybe there's just some corners they cut where it's like there's not really a whole lot that can be done. But it's not to say that maybe a patch doesn't help out and things like that.
Right.
But 3D games, right? That's where you don't really see it a whole lot, and it's not like there's a bunch of 2D games, right? I mean, I know you're playing the Bravely Default game, right?
Yes.
Did you notice anything in that one? Even though it's not technically a 2D game, it's closer to 2D than 3D.
No, I couldn't see it unless I actually looked for it or recorded something slow motion because the game runs at 60 frames a second. So just the smoothness of the refresh rate there made it a lot harder to really notice any of that, I guess. I mean, I would imagine it's probably more obvious in 30 frames per second games because then you're looking at, you know, what is it? 16.6 milliseconds is one frame in a 60 hertz game, and then it's double that, so 33. So the response time is basically an entire frame in 30 frames games, or 2 frames on a 60 hertz game. So I guess you really would see it more in a 60. I don't know, man. It's hard to notice. You have to really be looking for it, to be honest.
Yeah, I can't imagine it's a very, like you said, right? And like Digital Foundry said in their testing, they had to slow mo to actually do it. But I'm sure it depends on the sensitivity. I don't know if you've heard of this, but there's people that can't even use OLED panels because it actually gives them a
OLED,
headache. Oh yeah.
really?
So there is a less than 10% of people out there that actually cannot do OLED technology, like whether it be a TV, whether it be um, like a portable device. It's just not something that they can do because so there's just sensitivities to certain
That's
technologies,
crazy.
and then there's with this, even though it is a technical limitation, um, even if it's at a micro level, sure it can be there, but are a lot of people going to care about it? I mean, now people are talking about it because it was raised by someone, right? And
Yeah.
here's the thing: bad news is way bigger than good news. So
Oh yeah.
and
It will
people
always spread
flock to it.
faster.
People love smelling their own farts and smelling, you know, it's just people love to talk shit, like I get it. And so the drama, right?
Yeah.
And it's the latest thing, you know, it, it's summer, there's nothing else to be excited about anything. Oh, cool, we get to shit on something from Nintendo. Great, let's go do that. It's like I don't know. I'm not trying to say that Nintendo does everything right or anything like that either. I mean,
Right.
if anything, this is all helping us understand where they're coming from. Obviously, the Switch 2 does cost more here in the West and other parts of the world compared to Japan. And all in all, it's all data, so you have to understand if you ever buy any console, same with the PS5 and the Xbox Series X, um, you're trying it out. You're trying the first version out, and you're now a public beta tester, if you will. So it's like, does it mean that your device is going to be bad? No. Does it mean that there are duds? Yes.
Always.
That's going to happen regardless. And it's like, you just have to be ready for any kind of potentiality. How have you liked the battery life, switching over to battery life?
So before we get to battery life, I did want to just piggyback off of what you just said, with us being basically public beta testers. So this is the very worst that the Switch 2 will ever be right now on launch. It will never be worse than it is now. It's only going to get better. And just briefly touching on the overdrive thing with LCD screens, Nintendo has already stated that they want to reduce the system allocations for RAM and processing power. Like they want to get it down to 1 core instead of 2 cores for the OS and game chat, and get a gigabyte of RAM back from the system allocation to be used for games. So instead of 9 gigabytes being available, developers would have access to 10. So I have a feeling that this is one of those things where, it could have been a battery thing because, overdrive on LCD panels isn't free. Basically, what it does is it has a slight surge in voltage delivered to the panel in order to get it to get a faster refresh time. So that would impact battery life. So my personal theory is that whenever they do get their optimizations down where they can patch the firmware and get those resources back from the system, they'll also update the way it interacts with the panel for a better refresh rate, since they'll have more overhead with the battery to do that without significantly impacting the consumer side. That's what I think, anyways, because I know battery life has been great. We're going to talk about that now. I don't. It's been great for me. I understand not for everyone. It is a slight step down from the original Switch. I know Nintendo says it's rated from 2 to 6.5 hours versus 2.5 to 6.5 of the Switch One. But it also depends on what you're doing, right? I mean, if you're playing a Switch One game, you're probably going to get closer to that 6.5. And if you're playing an intense Switch 2 game that's running full blast 1080p HDR at 60 frames or 120 frames, obviously that's going to get you closer to the 2 hours. But I mean, this is something we have to consider. We all asked for a more powerful Switch. Nothing in this life is free. It's a 1080p screen instead of 720 now. That's like double the pixels, right? I think for 720 to 1080, it's like 2.1 times the pixel count. So we're doubling the pixels. In a lot of games, doubling the frame rate or even quadrupling once we start getting 120 hertz games. So those resources cost something. There had to be a trade-off somewhere, and battery life was basically it. But if you think about what we're working against with things like the Steam Deck, 2 hours on a Steam Deck, I mean, that's considered a good, that's a good charge cycle. If you're getting 2 whole hours out of playing a high-end game on Steam Deck, that's pretty rare. I think the only game I was able to get 2 hours out of on the Steam Deck were indie games. Now the OLED, that's a different story. I mean, it was one of those revisions that did improve battery life or performance. So, again, revisions. But in terms of we're just comparing the base models of things like the original Steam Deck or something like a ROG Ally or any of those PC handhelds, you're not going to be running Cyberpunk 2077 for 2 hours on those because you just physically can't.
It's true. And the other good point to that is if you do get 2 hours, I mean, think about it. You're playing a PC title on a Steam Deck. So it's similar with the Switch 2 now. Guess what? The Switch 2 games, they do run a bit more power usage as well. So it's takes a bit more power to run all of that extra, GPU power on the chip and everything. What I'm trying to say is you're going to be spending more battery life because it's nicer. It's a faster system. It's an overall more impressive unit. So, and it's in your hand. So you got to think about it that way, right? Now, obviously, I do believe there could be some optimization done software-wise, where they do update after update, where it's more than just incremental fixes. I feel like it's not going to be something where a new revision would get you more battery life, but I feel like as time goes by, things will improve. Sure, it's a very new thing. This is almost as new as when the Switch came out, because the Switch was made from just, scraps in a cave. So it's
basically, they Iron Manned it.
They did, and so if you think about it, the concept of the first Switch and the games that came out with it are what sold that console, because it was made from garbage. And it look at how long it lasted. It's still around. People are still going to play that console for the next. Think about the 3DS, right? How long did the 3DS hang around for after the Switch came out? It was here for at least 2 years.
It was around, but games stopped releasing for it within a year. I'd say generously, it lasted an extra 18 months
What I'm
after the
trying
Switch
to
came out.
say is that the Switch 1 is going to outlast how the 3DS went. Like it's going to be
Oh,
around.
100%.
Yeah, it'll be here like 3 years down the line. I could see 3 years more of support where it's like,
Yeah.
they got the end of whatever the last stock they had, or sure, maybe they'll stop manufacturing it after a certain point next year or something, right? But whatever is out there, the Switch Lights, the Switch OLEDs, like all of that stuff's there's a lot out there, and I'm sure Nintendo is still manufacturing them because it's still the highest selling console for them. But all that to say, the Switch 2 has to do a bit of work to get to not to that point. It's going to be a completely different experience just because it's a continuation, it's an evolution of the device. So, you know, time itself will be the testament of its improvement. It's up to us if we want to be a part of that and go through with it. And I think a big selling point is the software, man. Like that's really what's
Yeah.
going to drive people. And
Games sell consoles.
Yeah.
That's at the end of the day.
Yeah.
That's the one universal truth. And you mentioned that that it's going to sell better than the 3DS did once the Switch 2 came out, or once the Switch came out. Sorry. And yeah, I mean, just look at the Famitsu sales from last week. The second highest selling console in Japan last week was the Switch Lite. It sold another 5,217 units. And you want to know what the third best selling console was?
Tell me.
The Switch OLED model, 5,110. And then the original Switch was fifth behind the PS5 with another 2,400 units. So it just sold, combined with all three models, basically 13,000 units last week, despite selling 140,000 Switch 2 consoles. So, and if you're Nintendo or even developers making games for Nintendo, why not release a Switch port? Even if it's especially now, it's like, who cares if it doesn't perform great? Just having it out on Switch is a big deal because you can always have a Switch 2 version of that same game and have it run better for people that have Switch 2. So there's no reason, if it can run at all, there's no reason not to sell a Switch version and tap into that 155 million user base. But I just wanted to talk about sales real quick here.
Yeah.
It's been a while since it came out, but Nintendo did announce that it sold 3.5 million consoles in the first 4 days. That is insane. Crushed every record. I think the highest selling one before that was like the PS4. And it was like, I want to say it was like 2 weeks or 10 days or something. It sold like 2.1 million. Yeah. And this just completely eclipsed that. And, by the end of June, it's probably going to have, 6 to 8 million units, which is what analysts were predicting. We talked about this. They predict that there's going to be 6 to 8 million units available for the launch window. And in the first month, that sounds like we're on pace for that. It's already sold 1.2 million in Japan alone, which is kind of wild because that's a lot of units to sell just in the first couple in Japan. So it's on pace to crush every record in the book. But Switch 1 is still selling. So again, why wouldn't you make a Switch 1 game and just make it run better on Switch 2?
Yeah, just let us scale the resolution down.
Yeah.
Or something, like
keep the frame rates uncapped so that we get full 60 on Switch 2, and then let it run 2K or 4K.
Portably, but docked portably. That's my big thing. Is I want docked performance on portable for Switch 1 games. Like that needs to be. I wish that was a selling point. I know that's something that's probably going to happen later, and
well, let's talk about that.
Zero. If that never happens, I don't know. That's going to be a rough one for me because, yeah, let's talk about it. Like, to me, that's kind of an important thing. Like, how do you do DS games on 3DS? Oh, they get blown up a bit because it's a higher resolution. Well, on 3DS, at least you could hold the select button. The start button upon launching a DS game, and you got the native resolution. Sure, it was very tiny, but it was native. and it looked the part. It looked pixel perfect, exactly, crisp. Let us give us the option.
Mm-hmm. And so let's talk about backwards compatibility, because I think this
Yeah.
is probably one of the most undersold features of the Switch 2. And I actually have a top 10 list of games that run backwards
Okay.
compatibly the best on Switch 2. But just talking about it in general, we discussed beforehand, like, why would they go to a 1080p screen that's going to mess up the backwards compatibility? And then we had that aha moment, like, oh, they're just going to let you run the docked profile of Switch 1 games portable. Well, unfortunately, that is not the case. There are a handful of Switch 1 games that actually would render the game at 1080 and then downsample to the 720p screen. So, Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition was one of those games. So, they accidentally made a Switch 2 version of the game back in, 2018 when that game came out, and there's probably like
Yeah.
6 or so games that also do the same thing where it rendered it natively 1080 and then downsampled for the screen. So you for those specific games, yeah, you'll get a 1080p picture in portable mode and they look fantastic. But that's the one thing that does bother me as well, that they didn't do that. And again, this is going back to, this is the day one. We're still in the launch phase of this console, and there's going to be things that they improve. So again, I think this is probably going to be one of those things where once they do improve things on the efficiency side, if they're able to get it down to 1 core instead of 2 cores for system resources, get an extra gigabyte of RAM back, they may also update that too, where it's like, all right, now every Switch 1 game will always run the dock profile for every game. That's what I want. I did want to throw this at you because I was reading some things on Twitter and Reddit about, there
Okay.
was some back and forth between people about why they didn't do that initially. And someone did bring up a pretty good point, that it's not as simple as just letting the game run that way or tricking the system into thinking it's a docked mode, because there's a couple other things that does mess up. So, like, for example, when the Switch is docked, you can't use the Joy-Cons attached to the console to control the game. So it's going to require more than just Nintendo flipping a switch. They're going to have to program it to where, all right, well, yeah, it is running the docked graphic settings, but it still counts as portable. So it'll let you use Joy-Cons attached to the dock and things like that. Because, just going off the software itself, you can't do that. Once it's docked, you have to pull the controllers off in order to continue using them with the console. So I was like, okay, I didn't think of it from that angle. So there is a little bit more work involved with something like that. And touchscreen, touchscreen functionality isn't available when it's docked. It disables it because it's using the dock profile. So that could interfere with certain games that do make use of the touchscreen in portable mode, where if it's running the dock profile, well, now you lose the touchscreen capabilities.
While I agree with that, as someone who owns a modified version 1 Switch, I know that there is software that allows you to just use the docked resolution on portable without any issues. So I'm sure if they just invested time, which
Yeah.
is probably more than they want to right now, and they're just focused on other things. Again, software is probably a main focus right now, but engineers that designed the device specifically, I'm sure are already working on, with the software team
Yeah.
to figure out how they can, because there's tech even in jumping over to the dock. There is it's got the capacity to be able to output VRR.
Right.
It can do it. Can it right now? No. Again, they wanted to get it out there. They wanted to get it in our hands. I'm sure there's going to be some time where we're going to see improvements made onto the dock, portable, maybe the screen, maybe the battery, sure, but hopefully, certainly, getting those backwards compatibility titles to run a little bit crisper, because
Yeah.
man, it'll go a long way. To sell even more of those,
Yeah.
sure, but like, I mean, right now it's kind of a weird spot where, like, if you traded in your old Switch, your games don't look as good portably. And it's like that kind of breaks my heart, because sure, I'm someone who is kind of a freak and I own a DS if I want to play certain DS games, and instead of playing it on my 3DS, for example, like I'll go play it on my DS, or I'll play something on my old Game Boy or whatever. Like, there's reasons to go back, but I don't. It's not like I just want to have a one console, for that does everything. That's not what I'm trying to say. Is hey, if it is the successor, I'm hoping that there is something they can engineer together and
Yeah, and
make us
why
happy.
shouldn't you want it to be a one console fits
Yeah,
all? And honestly, I don't disagree with you. I think that eventually is going to be the end game. I think Nintendo is eventually going to make it to where docked profiles can run portably on it to take full advantage of the Switch 2's extra power. And just kind of circling back, I did mention that it was an undersold feature, the backwards compatibility. Dude, there are so many games that just instantly run so much better. So they talked beforehand that it's a hybrid hardware software solution. It's not just a one-to-one hardware thing where they just included Switch 2 hardware on board along with the Switch 1, or Switch 1 on board along with the Switch 2 to run those games like they did in previous consoles. So, it's not just using Wii hardware in a Wii U or DS hardware in a 3DS. Like, it legitimately is taking full advantage of the power of the Switch 2. And you mentioned even in the Switch 1 model, there's mods to let it run dock. Yeah, Nintendo, they're the ones that made the device. They could absolutely figure out whatever solution is needed, but I just wanted to bring up those talking points because it's like, okay, yeah, maybe it is a little bit more complex than just flipping a switch and boom, everything runs docks.
yeah,
And, I want them to do that
yeah.
eventually. But in the meantime, it is insane how much better certain games run. I talked about Hyrule Warriors. It was a 1080p game, so you get a 1080p portable mode, and the frame rates, man. Anything that had inconsistent frame rates on Switch 1 are instantly hitting whatever their maximum target is. We speculated on this that the extra hardware could help games with dynamic resolution scaling hit their maximum target more often. That's exactly what's happened. If you had, a sliding scale of 720 to 1080 dynamic resolution for a game, if you run it on Switch 2, it's going to hit 1080 all the time, and it's going to be at whatever the maximum frame rate is, with maybe some minor dips here and there. So I want to talk about my top 10 list of Switch 1 games that just run infinitely better on Switch 2.
Yeah, let's hear it.
These aren't in any particular order, but we'll start off with Saints Row. Saints Row the Third and Saints Row 4. I have 4, and I played it and tested it out. I did not realize this game had an unlocked frame rate. So it's instantly 60 frames a second locked. The resolution is obviously kind of lackluster. It's docked. I think it can hit 900p, which looks a little better, but you could definitely see it's a Switch 1 game. But to see that running at full 60 frames a second was like, wow, I didn't know that could happen. But yeah, Saints Row, both of those games are now just like a locked 60 frames a second. Fire Emblem Warriors 3 Hopes. This was another game that had an unlocked frame rate and dynamic resolution. Unlike the original Fire Emblem Warriors, this actually did have a maximum target of I don't think Three Hopes had a quality or performance mode. It just had one mode with both dynamic resolution scaling and an uncapped frame rate. But now it's like a max 1080 or 920, whatever the maximum resolution was for that one, and it's 60 frames a second. It runs buttery smooth now.
That's amazing. I would love to play it like that.
Honestly, speaking of Warriors, Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. Unfortunately, that does not have an uncapped frame rate. That did have a frame rate cap of 30, but infamously, it could not reach 30 very often. Now it does. Even in split screen, it's hitting that 30 frames a second target, so it's more than playable now.
That's amazing, and that's without a patch. That's just pure power, right? Yeah.
Correct. Just with the running it on a Switch 2. And that is a game I am hoping Nintendo does provide a free update. And we're going to talk about some of those free updates here in a bit. But going over some more games, Disgaea, all of them, especially the 3D ones, Disgaea 6 was one that I bought on launch, and it had a performance and quality mode, but just could not hang even in performance mode. Now it's a locked 60 frames a second. It looks so much better. And with the art style, it's got the cell shading. It looks really good, even though it's on the lower end of the resolution side of things. But just having them run and perform better is a massive boon. Next, we got Bayonetta 3. This was a Switch exclusive, and it targeted 60 frames a second, but could never hit it. Now, locked 60 frames a second. You're going to see a lot of games with that's becoming a running theme with all the games on this list. Like, they just perform exactly how we expected them to on the Switch, but they fell short. The overhead with the Switch 2 power and the fact that it's allowing it to use it in these games is so awesome to see. Rune Factory 5, another game, 3D, struggled on the Switch. It was one of those games that it's a 30 frames cap, but it still struggled and it didn't have the greatest, art direction or technical. I don't know what you would say. Like it wasn't like a technical showcase when it comes to graphics, but on top of that, it was similar to Pokemon in the sense that, yeah, it had not so great art direction and it struggled to perform. Well, now at least performance is fixed, so it's a lot more palatable to play. Klonoa Fantasy Reverie, the remake of Klonoa 1 and 2, those games were surprisingly bad on Switch 1 in terms of performance. They were trying to hit 60. They never did. I kind of stopped playing just because of how bad it was. I picked it up on a sale and just couldn't get through more than a few levels before I was like, this isn't a great experience. Now, I'm happy to report it's a lock 60. Another platformer, 2D-ish platformer with 3D models, Sonic Superstars. This was another game that just had that 60 frames per second target, but could not consistently hit it. I did beat this game on Switch 1, but it definitely struggled in many, many parts of the game. It was a rarity to see it running at full 60, but now I'm happy to report that's a locked 60 now. It looks really good on Switch 1. And now, my number one game that looks so much better on Switch 2 with just backwards compatibility, no patch, Monster Hunter Stories 2. This is the turn-based RPG from Capcom that used the Monster Hunter franchise. It had a cell shading look, kind of like Tales of Symphonia, if you've ever played that. Looks very similar. And I totally forgot this, but it had an uncapped 60 frames per second frame rate on the Switch 1, and it did use dynamic resolution scaling, but even when it was hitting the lower end of dynamic resolution scaling, it still looked and performed it chugged at times. It wasn't always hitting 60 unless it was in battle without any particle effects and all that. Now it is just a locked 60, and this is one of those games, it didn't have an anti-aliasing filter, but I think that actually works in its benefit. When you run it on Switch 2, I thought it was running native resolution at first, just because it looked so clear, even in portable mode. But this is probably this has been my favorite game to return to on Switch 1 and see the difference, because it feels like a brand new game. It feels like it's a Switch 2 native game without them ever even patching it.
It's amazing that the power alone was enough to be able to push it like that. And I actually am kind of surprised, because that is a turn-based game. Why does it have an unlocked frame rate?
Yeah, it was open world though. When you're not in battle, you can roam through the world and explore the monster duns, and like you could fly around the world later in the game once you unlock that. So it was a full like.
Have you tried any other Monster Hunter games like Rise?
I have not personally tried Rise on Switch 2. I have played Rise, obviously.
Yeah.
But from what I've seen, that's another game that just performs so much better on Switch 2. It only had a 30 frame cap, though, so it's not getting the biggest boost. But it is more consistent, and it did use dynamic resolution scaling, so I'm sure it looks good, and it's performing consistently.
Did you mention Splatoon? I'm sorry. Did you mention? You did, right?
No, I didn't. So that's actually part of our next section. Let's talk about the free updates part. Before we do you have any final thoughts on the backwards compatibility? I know you haven't really had a chance to play with these games.
We can move on. Yeah.
All right. So let's talk about the update. So we know about the 12 games that were day one. As soon as the Switch 2 came out, you could instantly play all of these games, basically a native Switch 2 version. They updated games like Super Mario Odyssey, New Super Mario Bros. U, Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury, 51 Worldwide Classics. That also got Game Share support for free. Captain Toad Treasure Tracker, both 2D Zeldas. So Link's Awakening and Echoes of Wisdom. Yep. Thank God. And of course, the big mamas, Scarlet and Violet. So I tried most of these games. The games that I owned that are on that list, I've tried. So I did play Odyssey. It was wild seeing Odyssey in, I don't know if it's 4K or if it's just 2K upscaled to 4K, But wow, dude, it looked incredible. And of course, it was hitting 1080p in handheld mode, full 60 frames a second for all of these games. I don't think a single one of these games is running at 30 on Switch 2.
Okay.
Yeah, even Pokemon, it's 60 frames a second. I actually finished Link's Awakening, my playthrough. I stopped at the 7th dungeon and just kind of fell off because of the stutteriness. It was unpleasant. But I actually finished my playthrough on Switch 2 because it made that much of a difference.
I'm glad, man, because that's actually my favorite Game Boy game, and I got to the very end too. I think I was in the 8th dungeon. And yeah, that game, I hear Echoes of Wisdom. I bet they're just incredible experiences now. If you
Yes.
had a hard time with them before, I know there's lots of people talking about just sharing their story. They're like, "Oh man, I played the Switch a few years ago, but maybe they came from PC and they're used to higher resolutions, they're used to higher frame rates, and unfortunately, yeah, some of the games just, again, we were running this console for 8 years off of scraps.
And some of these
So
games were too ambitious for the hardware. And Link's
they really
Awakening
were.
wasn't like a graphic showcase, but it did use a lot of advanced techniques with like the bokeh effect around
Yeah.
the corners, and it was trying to hit 60 frames a second. So it was just a little too much dip on its chip. It just couldn't do all of that on the
You know,
original Switch.
you know what game was such a good performer on the Switch 1 that we're talking about this, but like we never saw that from another Pokemon game was the Let's Go Eevee and Pikachu. Was just,
Yes.
man, and then the
Weird.
style.
Looking back at
Yeah.
that, it's so weird that those may have been like the best overall package of a Pokemon game on the Switch generation.
Now I
Like,
understand it's divisive because obviously the Pokemon Go mechanic isn't the greatest.
it was different,
But
but
yeah,
it was fun for what it was. It was an introduction to the Switch
yeah,
for
that's true.
Pokemon fans. And honestly, I love the fact that it is technically a mainline game. You could transfer your Pokemon to home, and it was the first time you could bring Pokemon from Pokemon Go to a console game. So I look back fondly on my time with Pokemon Let's Go, and it's definitely held up over time, especially considering how it stacks up against its later, more ambitious cousins that didn't quite stick the landing. But Scarlet and Violet, they're competent games now, man.
That's
It
saying a lot because those games really struggled.
Oh, it was awful. I mean, the art style doesn't look any better, so you're still getting some
No,
chunky textures, some bad pop in, really
missing
close to the
shadows.
screen. Yeah,
Yep.
there's still some weird things with it, but oh my goodness, seeing it run at 60 frames a second at full 2K, 4K, whatever it is resolution, and the amount of Pokemon that can show up on screen now. Oh man, dude, I went to Area 0. It felt like there was like, I think somebody counted it and it could do up to 40 Pokemon on screen at a time now, where it was 14 or 15 before.
That's incredible for shiny hunters. I'm so happy.
Oh yeah, it's shiny hunting is so much easier now. Yeah, shiny hunting is not a matter of if you can find a shiny anymore, it's a matter of when. Just any area you go can spawn so many now that it's just by virtue of being able to roll the dice almost 3 times as much on the
Mhm.
screen makes it so much easier to get a shiny. I even tested it out. I caught what was it that I caught? I caught a shiny Pokemon when I was testing out the patch.
What?
Yeah, I'm trying to
Which
remember.
one?
I can't remember. That's the crazy part. It was
Sounds like a very unmemorable Pokemon then.
I don't know if that's fair to say, but it was one of those that was in one of the what you call them. It was in Area 0. I know that much, that it was in Area 0 that I found it. I'm drawing a blank. I can't remember for the life of me what it was.
I feel like if it was Soaring Moon, you'd remember, but maybe it was.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't Roaring Moon. But I do have a shiny Roaring Moon.
I said Soaring.
You sure did.
I don't know what other. I mean, there's a lot of Pokemon in there. I just can't think of their names.
But it's not important. The point is, it's very easy
Yeah.
to get shinies now, and just in general, it's very easy to enjoy the game now, the way it was meant to be. enjoy. They fixed the windmill. You don't have 2 frame per second windmills in the distance anymore. It's running at full 60. They also changed the cold animations at distance, so like things don't run at like 15 and 5 frames a second when they get the certain distance past the camera. Everybody's running at full frame rate now. So it's just, man, I really, really wish I would have been able to play the game like this. And I'm really excited for people that just refuse to touch the games because of performance and are now going to start their journey. Because outside of performance and art direction, Scarlet and Violet are the best games the best Pokemon games on Switch. And now I can definitively say that it has surpassed Pokemon Legends Arceus as the best Pokemon experience on Switch, with the asterisk being only if you play it on a Switch 2.
Yeah, and I doubt that Arceus is going to see any updates. I don't know. I just kind of feel like after that Daybreak update, we didn't hear or see or
they don't want
talk
to.
about it.
We don't talk about Legends Arceus when Legends ZA is around the corner, but maybe one day. I do hope a lot of other games get the patch treatment where it's just,
Me too.
even if it's just uncapping the frame rate and saying, all right, now it runs 1080 portable and 2K dock. Even if they change nothing else, just having a bunch of Switch 1 games that do that would be a huge, huge improvement.
Yeah, I know the Batman Arkham Knight.
Oh yeah, that was another one.
WB is actually, they made a statement about pushing out an update that will.
Wait, did they?
Yeah, that will bring it closer to the PS4 version and the Xbox version of the games, which is really great. I mean, unless I'm not quoting that correctly, but I saw something about that, and I was impressed because I'm like, man, it's cool that they want to do that, take advantage of the Switch 2's hardware, but I wonder how many people are going to go back and develop like that because, the thing is, there's probably not a whole lot of gain outside of making your fans happy. There's probably not a whole lot of monetary gain, at least.
Oh man, I'm trying to find something on that where they announced that they're going to do something, but I can't find anything. But I do know that just with backwards compatibility, it runs
It is a little
so
better.
much better. It runs the full 30 frames a second that it's supposed to and looks really good on Switch 2. And that's just the thing, man. Any game that had any type of performance issues, whether it was inconsistent frame rate or dynamic resolution scaling that couldn't hit that top end target, every single one of those games is improved on Switch 2. And that's what I mean by it. It's an undersold feature. So while yes, we didn't get the 1080p, docked performance mode in handheld, I am happy to see that at least it's fully allowing the system to take advantage of that extra overhead with power because it is a hybrid solution and not one-to-one hardware emulation.
Right. It could. Yeah. It's insane that it's even emulating it. Honestly, like, good on Nintendo. I mean, they went from an NVIDIA chip right over to another NVIDIA chip that's made even custom. So they probably have a bit more because it's a custom chip this time. They probably have a lot more leverage over the power and like what it's able to do. And
Exactly. They were able to make a laundry list of things that they wanted it to do and tell NVIDIA, like, hey, this is what we're looking for. And it's so crazy you mentioned that. There was an interview with the Ask the Developers segment on Nintendo, like right before Switch 2 launch. They actually talked about that where they were asking about, like, hey, we need to make sure Switch 1 games can run on Switch 2. So that was a problem they had to solve. So it was a very intentional design the way they found it. And that's, it wasn't as simple as flipping a switch and saying, all right, run Switch 1 games. Like they did put some work in. And dude, how about the fact that the compatibility list has completely changed? You know that PDF on their website that shows which games run, which games have issues? You are now hard pressed to find a single Switch 1 game that doesn't work on Switch 2. Let me rephrase that. You won't be able to find a Switch 1 game worth playing that has an issue on Switch 2 now. So Pizza Tower was one of those that supposedly didn't work Funny enough, before it even got patched for the most recent one that fixed some like Pikmin compatibility issues, Pizza Tower ran day one for me. But there were several other games too, like I think one of the Mega Man Legacy Collection games, one of the Marvel fighting game collections had an issue. Like all of those like prominent games that supposedly had issues, they fixed within the first 2 weeks of the Switch 2 launch, and those games just work now.
What issues did you find?
Well, not me personally, but it was just what they listed on the website as having certain issues and that it's planned to be resolved with like an update. With Pikmin, I guess there was a weird like glitch on certain
Yeah.
menus that it would like put a bunch of weird colors on the screen. Pizza
Oh.
Tower apparently wouldn't even load, but
What? Like launch?
yeah, like the game wouldn't launch. It was listed as one of the games that could not be started on Switch 2, but I was able to get it running. I wonder if that's something they fixed with the day one patch, because I had no issues running Pizza Tower even on day one.
Okay.
But yeah, there's like no real game. Maybe some random obscure third party game that's like nobody's ever heard of may not run, but even on the website, like you'd be hard pressed to find a game that has issues now. So, and again, we talked about how this is the worst the Switch 2 will ever be. Now that they've fixed this, where it's basically 99% backwards compatible now, they could start working on improvements. It's like, all right, now we got all the games running on Switch 2, and some of them are automatically running better. Let's circle back now and start putting in performance patches to let some of these games run at 1080, 2K, 60 frames. And I really think we're going to see a ramp up that more games are going to get the free update treatment. Speaking of, you mentioned Splatoon. That was a massive surprise. I want to say like 3 days after the launch of the Switch 2, not only did they shadow drop a new game with Splatoon Raiders, which looks like a crafting survival type
Yeah.
game, like a resource management game, but they also said, hey, yeah, we're just going to make Splatoon 3 run in 4K now. And, oh yeah, here's 30 new weapons and we're doing a Splatfest. So that was incredible to see that it just runs better now. And even in areas of Splatoon 3 that didn't run at 60 frames, because the game for the most part is 60, but like the Splatcast thing, the little intro with the idols, and the Plaza, those always ran at 30 frames on Switch 1. Those are now running at full 60, and it's like, whoa, what a difference. And Salmon Run, which could get hectic on Switch 1, now just runs perfectly locked 60 frames a second at all times on Switch 2.
Wow, what a big difference. I mean, it makes you look back at previous versions and you're like, how did we deal with this?
And that's the thing. For in general, the Splatoon
Yeah.
games, Splatoon 2 and 3 ran really well on the Switch 1. So it's, it's not even like one of those games like, oh man, it's not a Scarlet and Violet situation where it's like, oh, it
Right.
desperately needs it, but like the Plaza and the Splatcast, like they didn't need to be 60 frames, and Nintendo didn't have to make them
But you
run at
figure
60.
you figure it's a shooter, right? And like I think it's always had a little leg up because it's like, it's a smooth 30, and then also they've got the gyro aiming, so
Well,
that
let me
does
be
help
clear.
out.
The battles were always 60. Those were 60 even
Oh,
on Switch
sorry.
1. Yeah,
Well
yeah.
then, okay, I misunderstood. Okay.
Yeah, so basically what they changed was when you're just
Mm,
like roaming
Just the
the
plaza
city,
area. I
yeah,
see.
the plaza area and the intro like video where they announced the stages, those were running at 30 on Switch 1, and
That's my
all of the
bad.
other gameplay it was 60, but now
Okay.
everything is 60. And the one place that did have performance issues on Switch 1 is Salmon Run, the survival mode, where if you're at higher difficulties and things were hectic and there was tons of enemies and ink on the screen, it could take a bit of a hit and drop to like the low 50s, high 40s, and you could see some dips there, especially with certain specials. But now even those issues are ironed out on Switch 2, and just everything runs at 60 and everything runs at a higher resolution. And if I'm not mistaken, this is the first instance of a Switch 1 game that got a Switch 2 patch after the launch. And as far as I'm aware, the only one. I don't know of any other game that Nintendo has announced that will get a free update. So I'm happy to see that. We talked about that in the last episode. Like, hey, it's nice that we have these 12 games getting updates, but how long are we going to have to wait to start seeing more? So it took 3 days. Hopefully in July, we get a handful of other games, maybe the Fire Emblem games, the Xenoblade games, please. What are some games you want to see get those free updates on Switch 2? Now that we kind of know which ones have already gotten them and how they run.
It's kind of hard to say because, like, Metroid Prime, I think runs 60.
Ooh, that could be a good candidate to get a 120 frames a second patch, though,
Oh, that's true. Or have like maybe the
since
mouse
Prime 4 is going to have it.
adding mouse functionality would be kind of cool. Just because it's already got quite a lot of functionality. I love that Metroid
Yeah,
Prime has the Wii compatibility. Like, I love that the menu offers the Wii experience if you wanted to play with your
with the
Joy-Con
Joy-Cons.
like you could with the Wiimote. And I was like, oh, this is nice. I'm like, wow, they didn't have to do any of this, but they did. And I was like, wow, this is
It's a fantastic remaster.
amazing, amazing. Yeah, I'm not sure about the what it does. It always felt like, I don't know. It could already be at 60 frames, but
It is, yeah.
yeah, okay, cool. Well then, like
But
you
that's
said,
the
run
thing. They could add
120.
a performance
Right.
mode like Prime 4 is going to have. Prime 4 is going to run at 1080 120 or 720 120 in handheld, and then full 4K 60 or full 1080 60. So Prime 1, I believe, runs 900p at 60 frames a second docked. So that could be a candidate where they patch it to not just run at a higher resolution, but it could be one of the first games we see get a 120 frames per second mode with the extra overhead.
I hope that's the case. I mean, there's that game. I'm trying to think of something else, but
You already know I'm gonna say Xenoblade. Like anything Xenoblade. I'd
you
like
know,
X first so I could finish my playthrough,
I was just going to
but
ask you which
two,
one first, but yeah, 2 definitely. I feel
it
like
needs
2
one.
deserves it more just because
Yeah.
2 came out a long time ago. 2 was like the
Yeah.
release of the Switch. I think that was the same
Yeah.
year.
2017, yeah. It
Yeah.
was December of that year.
Yep.
So I mean it's the oldest and crustiest Xenoblade game before Monolith Soft really started to work their wizardry on the console. So I think that game I don't think it's gonna be a free patch type of deal. I feel like that's gonna be one where they make like an actual paid Switch 2 edition, where maybe they do some other quality of life, or make a definitive edition, or make it definitive edition as an upgrade to the Switch 1 game. I just feel like that one's going to get a little more love than just a hey, here's a patch. But the other games are basically already the definitive versions of their games, and a simple upgrade patch would do wonders for all of them. And we already know X has that 60 frames per second mode in the code. They just need to, let it out and we could play Xenoblade Chronicles X, which is probably the best looking Switch game of all time, in my opinion.
With
No
the
bias.
with the success of Mario Kart World and how they helped out with that game, maybe it will
Yes.
be free. Maybe we'll just get a nice patch and, because that game does need a little bit of work, not just like a quick power patch. Like it definitely
Are you
does.
talking about two?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. There's other issues the game
Yeah.
had that outside of just, tech specs, it does need a little TLC for sure.
It does, and I can't say that that's the reason why I was very slow to play that game, but I made it to like chapter 9, I think. 9 or 10.
Oh, wow. You're almost at the end. It
Yeah.
only has 10 chapters.
Yeah, I made it very close. I could be wrong. Maybe it was 8 or 9, but either way, I made it pretty far through the game, and Torna already played really well compared to the base
Yes.
game.
Yeah, they had a new engine for that one. So
Yeah.
that's kind of what they built Xenoblade 3 and Xenoblade 1 Definitive Edition off of. So like that was kind of like the delineation point where it's like, all right, now that we have Torna, like we know what we're doing with this hardware now and can produce decent results.
Yeah, I can't think of anything else. I'm trying to see. How was Fire Emblem Engage? Was that a pretty good performer?
Yeah, that one was really good. It's the best looking Fire Emblem game on Switch 1. So, I mean that's one that could look really nice with the 60 frames. I think Three Houses probably needs it more though.
Yeah,
I mean, not that it had any like major performance issues, like, but it did have some performance dips. And because it didn't have any anti-aliasing, you could see like a lot of pixely, jaggy stuff on there. So that's a good candidate for a patch, I would think.
I agree. Yeah, it could just benefit overall. Now, what about an older game? Like, what about? Actually, that's a game I would like to see patched is Astral Chain. That would be amazing.
Oh yes, I totally forgot about that. But 100%. I would finally finish my playthrough if they patched Astral Chain to get a 60 frames per second or 2K patch,
I
whatever it is,
I
because
I also got far too.
that feels like one of those games that like really would be able to take full advantage of the 60 frames. And I really hope to see a lot of third parties jump on this bandwagon, even if they charge for it, which they probably will. I'm okay with that. I'd rather just pay an upgrade fee and, play the games at much higher like resolutions and frame rates. So, just to give you kind of an older example, like the Doom games, having Doom games run at 60 frames on Switch 2 would be really cool.
Yeah,
So
I
I'd
mean,
love to get that.
they're already capable of doing it on other consoles, so it would just be a matter of
Right.
porting over the functionality and taking advantage of the hardware. So I'm sure that's something that could happen. I think we're going to see some really interesting stuff like by the end of the year. There's probably going to be quite a
Oh
lot
yeah.
of free patches. There's going to be who knows what the price points are going to be for some of those paid Switch 2 editions where it's like, oh, if you want to upgrade, maybe it's not even 8 or $10, maybe it's even cheaper, maybe it's like a 4 or 5, and people are more willing to throw 4 or 5 at something to
Oh
be able to
yeah.
play it more. So
Well, look at Fantasy Life. That's
yeah.
one of those. I think the price for Fantasy Life from the Switch 1 to upgrade to the Switch 2, it was like $2.59, which is a weirdly specific number. But like, yeah, less than $3. Like you can't even get a McDouble for that cheap. And you could get a Switch 2 version of the game, which by the way runs really well in Switch 2. It's a really great experience.
I heard
So
I heard
you're
good
right.
things. I heard some good things about that game. I know Level 5 had quite a rocky development with that title. Not to get
Oh yeah.
off topic
It
here.
got delayed so many times.
Yeah, I mean they had their I think they had I was reading something about like was it a producer or director? I think they had to step off the project and somebody else had to come in and like help out toward the end of the development. They just had quite a lot of problems there trying to get the game out, and it looks really beautiful. I played the 3DS one and I really enjoyed it.
Oh yes, and Fantasy Life I is just improves everything from the original Fantasy Life. And I believe it's actually one of the highest rated Switch 2 games right now. I think it's sitting at 85 on Metacritic, which I mean the first game was like a 71. So I mean it was a
Oh
niche game.
wow.
But, just that alone speaks to the level of quality improvements that Fantasy Life I brought, and it's so nice to finally have it. I'm glad they took their time. They didn't try to, rush it to meet a deadline and actually kept delaying it and let it cook until it was ready because the final product we got was 100% worth the wait.
That's good. Are you going to get that one or are you going to wait for a sale?
Oh, I already have it. That was one of my day one
Oh,
purchases.
oh, I didn't know that. Okay, did you did you do a game key card or do you do digital?
No, I'm doing all digital. I don't have any desire for the game key cards. I guess that's a good segue. Let's talk about that because I know that's been another hot button
Yeah.
issue with the game key cards. I don't hate game key cards. I think it's cool that they're kind of like a halfway point between digital and physical, and it gives you some of the benefits of both. But for me, if I'm going to have to install these on my card, I want to be able to just play them with no strings attached. I don't want to have to keep hot swapping cards to play my games. And you know me, I've got a 1 terabyte SD card in my Switch 1 and basically had all of my games installed at the same
Yeah.
time. So I've been all digital since 3DS, and it's just so nice, especially for a portable console, to just have all my games readily available. So I'm probably going to stick to that on Switch 2. And outside of maybe some special editions, I probably won't even really get any physical cartridges. So, I mean, game key cards, there's I guess I'm the wrong person to ask because I don't really buy physical anyway. But it is nice for people to have a way to buy a game and like lend it out or resell it later if they end up finishing it and not wanting to hold on to it. So that part of it is nice, even though the install thing is already an issue. But what are your thoughts on game key cards, man?
Uh, I'm a pitchfork with them. I'm an angry villager with a pitchfork. I'm really against the idea. Now, I know that we've had it for a while. It's not like this is the first time we've ever seen something like this. We have
No.
There's to name one Switch One game that has a similar functionality, since it's closer to Nintendo than Sony and Microsoft, um, like Spyro, like the
Oh yeah,
Reignited
the
trilogy. I
trilogy.
believe the
Hmm.
first game is on there, and I believe maybe the
The
second
other two got
game.
to be downloaded.
Maybe the other two have to be down. Either way, you don't get
Hmm.
the full game on the cart, and you have to download. And the only way to play that download is to have the cart in your console. So, you
Hmm.
know, it's taking up space on your SD card or your console storage, and then it's taking up physical space in your pocket or in your game carrying case. So now you just have to decide, okay, is this something I will ever like let someone want to let someone borrow, or do I want to gift this to someone? And I was thinking about this earlier today, Zero. What do you think um, should happen with digital games? Like, I say that because my mind kind of wandered, and I had a thought. I said, it'd be interesting if you could like relinquish control or ownership of a game that you own, and you wouldn't be able to receive that title again. Like let's say digital games now just
Like a
start.
true transfer of ownership.
Yeah, they let's say they get coded just like each game card has a serial number. Imagine all your digital purchases have like almost an ID, so it can be tracked. So let's say you wanted to sell it back, to get some of your money back, or maybe not that, maybe sell it to a friend or like give it to a friend or whatever. Just being able to have a little bit more ownership to the digital side would be really cool. And I don't know. I know this sounds like fantasy in real
Sounds
life.
dangerous,
Yeah,
honestly. But to be honest, that's basically what the game key card provides. That's exactly
that's
what
what
that
they
is.
do.
It's a physical license for a digital game. And unlike these old games, like the Spyro trilogy and the Crash trilogy on Switch One, as far as I'm aware, that was like a one-time download. Well, not a one-time download, but like when you put that in and went to the eShop to download the rest of those games, it tied it to your Nintendo account, correct?
Oh, I think it did. You didn't need to have the cartridge in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, not just that. Like I think you still did need to have the cartridge,
Oh,
but the reason I asked that is because tying that to your account. I don't know if it did this, by the way. I haven't tested this because I'm all digital anyway. But if that is what it did, then you lose the benefit of being able to like sell that game if it was a one-time use thing because that cartridge is now kind of useless for anyone else because it's tied to your account.
it's only gonna have the one game, and if like,
Because it's like a download code in a box.
it's a
Like you
download.
enter the code to download it, and like once you've used that code, you can't you can't redeem that code anymore. It's tied
So,
to your account.
so if anything, it's an upgrade from something like that because, yeah, if you buy it, that's a very good point. Very good point. Because if you buy any game that had any sort of code in it for DLC, and before virtual game keycards, that's how they sold stuff. You just had a code, you redeem it, now it's associated to an account. Buy a game, it came with DLC, you're SOL. You're not going to get that because it's probably already redeemed. Um, I think we're going to see the value of game key cards as time goes. It's going to hurt right now just because it's like kind of a reality shock, whatever. We don't have, it kind of sucks for the indie. That's what I feel really bad about. It's like for indie games, we're probably just going to have virtual keycards. You're not going to be able to just physically have something in your console and not worry about
Yeah.
downloading it. I'm going to miss those days very much. And I think that's why a lot of people will probably still buy Switch versions of games that have all the game on the card and just get the upgrade and pay more for that later because of how much they care for it. But I
Well, let
don't,
me play devil's advocate
yeah.
here. If it's an indie game, I mean, if anything, game key cards are like I don't want to say it's better than a physical cartridge for them, but it's definitely cheaper because you're not going to buy a 64 gigabyte cartridge if your game's only taking up, half a gigabyte or 1 or 2 gigabytes. So it's cheaper for the indie developer to manufacture that and have a physical presence in stores. And at the same time, the customer does get a benefit of that because unlike say Street Fighter 6, which is 51 gigabytes you have to install plus any updates and patches, even with a game key card. That indie game is small, so you're not really worried about the storage it's taking up on your Switch 2 because it's an indie game. It's, if it has to download 500 megabytes, no big deal. Patches for other games are bigger than that. You know what I mean? So, like, for indie games, I think it's actually better for indie devs, but it hurts for main, like, AAA games and third-party games like Street Fighter. Those are the ones that are really going to hurt consumers because, okay, I just spent $70 on this, and now I have to reserve 51 gigabytes on my Switch 2 to play this game, and that's a fifth of my overall storage already, not counting, like, SD cards and stuff.
That's true. I just don't like the idea of having to rely on internet, I guess, but...
Well, the good thing is, once you do download it, it doesn't do, like, an internet check to play the game. Like, the license is on the cartridge itself, so, like, once it's downloaded to your Switch 2, you can fully play that indefinitely offline by having the cartridge in there. So that is one nice thing.
I wanted to finish a previous thought that
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good. I just wanted to get it out there, and I think that in the next few years, we're going to see some really cool prices for those virtual game key cards. And I'm talking like, think about this, right? Here, this is another pro. How many times have we gotten a physical release of a game, whether it's indie or not, and we don't know if it's only going to have one wave of a release? And so everybody scrambles and buys it, or maybe whatever, right? The cool thing about virtual keycards is that now it's like, who cares? If that's on a virtual keycard, they can keep producing those because they're not going to be very expensive to produce. And those can just be available, not to the same level as the availability of digital versions, but it'll be nice to see that change where, like, okay, cool, now it's like not scramble to go get this Fire Emblem game, or I know Fire Emblem will probably just appear on a card, but you get what I mean. It's like, cool, an indie title nobody ever heard of that they finally put on a virtual game card. It's like, cool, let me go grab that, and now it's like a halfway physical thing. And then again, sales I think will be beneficial for the consumer. They'll down the road where, time has passed. Okay, cool. This game used to be 40, it's still 50 digital. Okay, now it's like 20, 30 bucks. Cool, let me get the card, and it's cheaper. So I think it could be in benefit to the consumer, price-wise, just being more affordable.
Yeah, so I mean that's a good point. You do get the physical benefits of it, where the reselling in secondhand market can exist, and you can get a digital game for significantly cheaper than what you would just going on the eShop. Because if it never goes on sale in the eShop, you're stuck paying retail price, and that mostly applies to Nintendo games, like first party games, because pretty much every third party developer on Switch will put their games on sale eventually. But you can shop on eBay for a game key card, and like you said, 2 years from down the line, if everybody's done playing Bravely Default, for example, that's another game key card, despite not being a very big game. So if you want a physical copy of the game, you could probably pick it up cheap, 2 years down the line when nobody wants them anymore. And there you go, you have your copy of Bravely Default HD. And another thing that I did want to address with the game key cards, again, I don't personally like them. I don't have a use for them because, to me, I'm only getting half the benefits of digital while getting half the benefits of physical, but I don't sell my games, so I don't need the physical benefits. So for me personally, I don't have a need for game key cards, but I do see the value. The other thing with the game key cards that a lot of people are upset about is like, oh, well, what if I have this 15 years from now and I can't download the game anymore because the servers are down, or they stopped letting you download it, or they could revoke your access at any time. And I'm not saying that's not a valid concern, but we do have precedent. Nintendo has set the precedent. Even though the shops have shut down for like WiiWare, DSi Shop, 3DS, Wii U, you can still, to this day, re-download any WiiWare game you purchased on the original Wii when it came out almost 2 decades ago. They haven't shut that ability down, and it probably costs them next to nothing just to keep those servers running specifically. So I highly doubt we're going to come into a situation where oh, you can't re-download this anymore because the Switch 2 eShop has been shut down in the year 2055. So Bravely Default HD game keycards are pointless now. So I really don't think we need to worry about that as much right now. I mean, because it's never happened. We are living in a timeline where Nintendo has never made you lose access to your games.
That's true. It would be nice to get some just statement from Nintendo about it, though. I think that would be cool. Like just some transparency about, hey, them acknowledging, hey, you can still, like what you just, pretty much everything you said, almost verbatim. It's like, hey, you can still download Wii games. You could still all that stuff, like reassuring people. Hey, I know we know this is a different thing that we're doing, but how about this? Instead of the uncertainty, we'd like to let everybody know that as long as the internet exists, you'll be able to download these because we know that they're out there and they count as because those virtual key cards, those are still cartridges. So guess what those cartridges still have? They have a serial. So they are a true hybrid. It's not just a digital copy. It is a physical copy that just doesn't. It's an ice cream cone without the ice cream in it. And then the ice cream comes from the cloud, and then it goes right back up into the cloud if you delete it or if you sell it, and then you download it again, right? So it just, some transparency I think would be good, and it's Nintendo, so let's
yeah, I just don't think it's really a fear
I don't
that's
think
worth
so
talking
either.
about yet.
Yeah.
But no, I agree with you. It'd be nice to have some type of reassurance, but I think my only real disappointment regarding keycards is just how many third parties are flocking to them. I'm really hoping that this is just like the reason Nintendo only offers game keycards and 64 gig cartridges is to get to the point where, because they're only asking for 64 gig cartridges to be produced, they eventually come down in price to the point where, there's so many game cartridges, 64 gigabytes, that are in circulation that it costs them next to nothing to produce, where the difference between a game key card and a full cartridge becomes negligible. And then third parties can then use the full cartridges more often because, you know, this could be kind of like a long game play from Nintendo where it's like, yeah, it's going to hurt at first because we already know the path of least resistance. Third parties are going to choose the game key card. But one, as we get more orders for cartridges to drive the price per cartridge down, and two, consumers voting with their wallet. From what I've seen, game key cards aren't performing particularly well on Switch 2. So it's going to be a problem that I feel like will eventually fix itself, where, companies are going to see like, hey, our customers aren't really digging this whole game keycard thing. Maybe our next release maybe we should splurge the extra couple dollars per unit to get a full cartridge, even if it is technically a waste of space for our 20 gig game to have a full 64 gig cart. Look at Rune Factory. Rune Factory 6, I believe. Yeah, Rune Factory 6 Guardians of Azuma. That's one of the best performing physical third-party games behind Cyberpunk. Those two games are performing specifically well, likely in part to the fact that they're some of the few games from third parties on Switch 2 that are on a physical cartridge with the full game on the cart.
Yeah.
So, I think the market's going to kind of help in that regard where, hey, if nobody's buying these game key cards and now Nintendo is able to offer them at a cheaper rate for the full cartridges, let's just go ahead and just start using the cartridges.
Just let me use my old Switch to play DS games by being a bottom screen to my Switch 2. Can you imagine if they did that? If they did something like that where they're like, well, since there's so many Switches out there, we're releasing the DS emulator that requires you to have a Switch 1. I don't know why I feel like they wouldn't do that, just because. Or what if
maybe they
phone,
won't, but they could.
Maybe your phone could be the bottom screen.
I don't know if they do that, but because then you don't have the buttons. But like,
oh yeah,
they kind of already have the technology built in with Game Share. You could use your Switch 1 as a Game Share controller for Switch 2, and we've already seen a couple games take advantage of the asynchronous picture with like Fast Fusion, Captain Toad Treasure Tracker, and the 51 Worldwide Classics. All of those games, when you beam your image to another screen, every player gets their own screen separate from the Switch 2. So you can have two different images being shown, one on the TV and one on the Switch. So in practice, they absolutely could do that. Is it going to be a great experience? That's another question. But again, we talk about precedent. It's there. You can have two different pictures with a Switch 1 and a Switch 2. They already have the way to interact with each other with Game Share. Let's talk about Game Share for a bit, because I've tested it. I've played 3D World and I've played Fast Fusion. So I'm going to be honest with you, man. I'm a little disappointed. I think, at least on the local version, I haven't tried it online. It's not a great experience, man. There's constant, like,
What's wrong?
not buffering, but like the digital noise of like a low signal, like when you're watching Netflix and your internet tanks, and so it starts rendering at like 240p and everything's blocky and pixelated.
Yeah, what?
That happens a little too often
No
for my taste.
way.
And even my son is noticing that. We were playing and he's like, "Oh, I don't like it. It's glitching." He calls it glitching when the frame rate tanks. So it's like it is not a great experience. And even in Mario, like basically we had a 4-player game up where everybody was playing, all together. For one, whenever you do Game Share, it does lower the resolution that the Switch 2 is running at natively as well. But on top of that, even if the screen is the same exact image, because for Super Mario 3D World, every player doesn't get their own screen. It's just a replica of what's already there. It's not a good experience. It's constantly having that digital, like, digitization, the artifacting, and the slowdowns and the lag. And it got to the point where I was like, "Hey guys, you could still use the Switch. You guys are in the game.
Yeah.
Just pretend it's a regular controller and look at the TV. That way you don't have to worry about the glitch." It is not a good experience. And I really hope that's something that they improve whenever they get the efficiency stuff down and fix how many cores are dedicated to what, because it really is a letdown. It's not the same thing as DS download play, and it's not even the same as whatever tech they used with the Wii U. Like the Wii U did not have that issue at all.
Right.
Like unless you were like 50 feet away from the console with like 3 different walls between it, that never happened.
It's kind of magic on the Wii U. Yeah.
It really is. Like we all thought before the Wii U came out that was going to be a bigger issue than it ever was. But it just works so well that whatever technology or whatever protocol they were using to like send the image wirelessly, it was almost like no delay either. It was like maybe 1 frame, maybe 15 milliseconds delay. If you held up the Wii U gamepad in front of the TV and like moved around, you might notice a delay. But aside from that, like it just worked. So that's something I do think Nintendo needs to make better, because it was one of the things they really advertised leading up to the launch of the system, and I thought was going to be a great feature, and they even have tons of games using it. Donkey Kong Bonanza, that's one of the games that's going to have Game Share. But if the experience for that is anything like it's been for the games that are already out using Game Share, it's just not worth it. I'll be honest. It's very I'm more disappointed in that than I am with anything with the screen, with the blur and the lack of HDR. Like, to me, that's the bigger letdown.
Oh, that's a good point, though. I mean, like, that's still amazing. And I wonder how many people are actually testing that out, because maybe they hear something, or maybe they just don't have the ability to test it maybe thoroughly. But that's a big letdown. What do you think of the camera? And have you messed around with the functionality behind that?
I did try a couple game chats. Game chat does work really well. So Game Share is a letdown, but game chat is really, really good. The voice isolation is really impressive. The only time you could hear somebody else's game is if a human was speaking, because sometimes it would trick the Switch 2 into thinking a regular person was speaking.
Oh, I see.
But in general, like, you can't hear like gameplay noises or anything, background noise. There was a time I was talking to an old high school friend, and Cal was running the blender behind me, like, just like the commercial and the ad in the Nintendo Direct where they were like running the vacuum and stuff. It was just like that, and they couldn't hear it on the other end. So that part works really well. Voice comes through super clear. It's really easy to like initiate a game chat or join a game chat. That part works really well. And speaking to the camera, I do have a random webcam that I had
Yeah.
back when I worked at the call center. I was able to just get a Type-C adapter and plug it in, and it just worked. So
Nice.
compatibility is great. And there's even apps you could use to plug your smartphone in and use that as a webcam. So like you don't need the Nintendo camera. You could just use any $10, $15 webcam and it'll give you a great experience cuz the the I guess the AI part of the processor is doing all the heavy lifting on the Switch 2 with like the camera tracking and the voice isolation. So like the camera itself just needs to be functional and it'll work just fine.
I'm glad
So,
they figured out the drivers for that to work so well with so many. I'm glad it's not a proprietary function and that it's closer to
right.
like a PC solution where you just plug and play and you move
Yeah.
forward, you know. And I'm glad they figured out the right drivers to get practically. And I've seen some videos where they go crazy. They test the eye toy, they test the Vita like somehow like modded to act like a webcam, like crazy stuff.
I believe it.
And it works. And it's nice to
Yeah, and
hear about
and
the isolation. Sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say, like, talking about how well it works. That's another one of those ask the developers thing that Nintendo specified is something they worked on when designing and engineering the CPU and GPU with Nvidia. Is like that was built from the ground up. From like that wasn't like a feature they tried to get to work later. Like they built the system with that in mind to make it work as well as it did, which is why I'm really disappointed that Game Share is as lame as it is. But the voice chat works great. My only two like complaints or like desired updates are being able to join an existing game chat without having to recreate the room would be nice, because if you're already in a game chat session, you can't just the host can't just send an invite afterwards. If you want to add somebody else who wasn't initially invited, then you have to back out, resend the invite, and start a new room. So that's a little clunky. I hope that gets fixed. And the other thing is, give me text chat. Why can't I just send a text based message to a friend on my friends list? It still bothers me so much that we can't do that. So if I can get those two things, I will be happy.
But that's not even asking for too much. I feel like sending a quick message, even if
No.
it was just like a voice to text, if the other person, like, I don't know, like, there's just solutions there. And I know that they're trying to make it like, child safe and they're trying to be, however, safe they're trying to be. But like,
But they have preventions for that already. Like because I had my daughter's Nintendo account signed into my Switch 2, I was forced to set up the parental controls app before any account could use game chat on my Switch 2.
oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so like they've already got like the safety
They
stuff.
have
Like you
measures
have
in
to kind of
place.
jump through some hoops. Yeah,
Yeah.
you got to jump through some hoops to even use game chat. So because they've done that, it's like, all right, come on, let me send just a basic text based chat. I've actually been invited to a game chat session with one of the not randoms, but like one of the people on my friends list that I don't interact with outside of the Switch environment. And it was to try to coordinate a Smash Ultimate session. And it was a blast playing with him and online. And it's such a different experience when you can just talk with the other person. Like they're in the same room. Like that part was nailed. I just want it to be a situation where maybe I don't want my voice on just yet. Maybe I just want to send a message to coordinate that part. I should be able to just send that, even if it's limited to the Switch app, where you can only send and receive the messages through the app, but like you get the notifications on the Switch. I think that would be a good compromise, but it still bothers me that we can't do that yet.
It is kind of like an oversight. Um, and I can't imagine it'll be for long though, because they can do something about it. I personally think that another way to improve the game chat would be, I know you said the isolation is really good, but I wish the C button had a bit more functionality, to be honest. Like you made a whole dedicated button that now takes up space on a controller that now is negatively affecting someone who doesn't have Switch Online. There's a whole button that just doesn't exist for any purpose. Like, can that actually be remapped? to play.
Yeah, you could just remap it.
Okay, I wasn't sure about that. Well, then let me just add this then. Be cool if you could double tap and maybe it let you mute or unmute the chat or something like that.
Ah, that would be nice. As far as I'm aware, there's no quick button for mute. You have to bring the game chat menu up.
Right, and that wouldn't be hard to program. It's something later with some time and effort they could just be like, oh cool, let's make our game chat just a bit more cozy and, just more convenient in those cases where maybe some sound coming through and it doesn't isolate or whatever, right? Another thing that I would like to see improved is what's it called? It's when you join with friends online. So like, let's say you want to play a game together, and then maybe you go off and join others in a game lobby. Like, let's say you want to go up against other people. It's like you should be able to just hop in together in like a little bubble, and then you guys go against the world or whatever. Like, I feel like that should be something that's possible with like Mario Kart or without you having to both be in the same home. It's like it would be cool if you guys could just do that remotely.
I'm not quite sure what you mean with that.
So like, let's say I come over physically. You and I can both play Mario Kart 1 and 2 player. You're 1 player, I'm 2 player, and then we play against other people online, right? Well, let's say I go back to my house. I can't do that with you, can I?
Like, as if it was a local connection on the system? Because game share does technically do that, where you can game share the game to someone who doesn't own the game online, and then you guys can both go online, 2 players, and play against other people. That is limited to Switch 2 to Switch 2, so that is one thing you do have to have 2 Switch 2s. But yeah, you can game share to another Switch 2 and then go online together.
But if I have a copy of the game, can we still do it kind of like co-op together against everybody?
I mean, that's going to depend on the game, really. But like Splatoon, for example, yeah, you could do that. You could hop into a lobby with someone else, and then once you're in a party, then you go online. Like, there's no system-wide party system, if that's what you mean.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Okay.
Well, I mean, technically there is, because that's essentially what game chat becomes. You're making a party on the system, and once you are all in the party, you can game share with anyone else in there to share your game with them, and they can play with you. But like, yeah, in terms of doing that before going into a game, you could just coordinate that beforehand and then join the game together. So I guess yes and no. You can do that, but it's not really like necessary.
It's conditional, circumstantial. Switching it up a little bit, no pun intended. Hardware wise, man, I've been hearing really good things about the Wi-Fi.
Oh my God, yes. I'm glad you brought this up, because in terms of that's the one thing we haven't talked about with the Switch 2 is just like the software experience and like the little things. Wi-Fi, it's got Wi-Fi, I think it's 6E, the protocol that it uses. Man, I'm getting speeds on here that I could never get on Switch 1. Like, it is so much better, whether it's wired or wireless. The dock does have a built-in Ethernet port, thank God. But yeah, dude, like, I can run a speed test on my Switch 1 right now and get, if I'm lucky, download speeds of 30 to 40 megabits a second. And my internet is like 700 megabits a second, so I'm getting less than like 6% of what I should be getting. And obviously, I know there's other factors. You're never going to get your full download and upload speeds, but it would never even get close on the Switch 1. But on the Switch 2, dude, like, I can actually hit triple digits now. And that's just something that couldn't be done before. Bluetooth is improved. It is so much easier to pair headphones now. It's not nearly as finicky as it used to be.
Wow.
And it's so much faster.
That's amazing. And like, even reconnecting once you've already synced.
Oh, yes. I had my LG Tones. I hooked up one night while I was in bed playing. And when I turned it back on, it just instantly connected back to the Switch 2 before it even reconnected to my phone. It's really good.
We've been living a caveman life with how we've connected it, because it's probably working off of a module that's made out of tinfoil. So, who knows?
I mean, you're not wrong. Remember the left Joy-Con issues with Switch 1, where like if you held it behind your back? I mean, we talk about like the screen issues of Switch 2, but like compared to Switch 1's launch, like this is like a perfect refined unit in comparison. Like, yeah, like there was so
That's
many
true.
other like little things. And that's another thing. Like just all of the little things on Switch 2 are better. Talk about loading the eShop. It doesn't run like freaking molasses now. It instantly loads. You can scroll through them. You don't have to wait 20 seconds for the thumbnails of games to load. You can navigate between all the menus quickly. And this does apply to Switch 1 as well, but I'm so glad they updated the OS to allow you to automatically upload screenshots and videos to the Nintendo Switch app. So then I could just pull up my phone and look at all my screenshots and videos there and then download them to my phone locally without having to go through that
Nice.
whole QR code nonsense.
That's good because that's what the PS app on Sony. You can do
Yeah,
that, and but you do have to turn
Xbox
on.
as well.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, and you can
Yeah.
you have to hit a lever somewhere. You have to check a box somewhere, and then it allows you to do it from that point
Yeah.
forward. But it's good that Nintendo has a solution like now.
Yeah, they finally are starting to catch up in a lot of a lot of regards, but it's been really nice. There are obviously things that we want to be better. Game share needs to be completely revamped. Game chat can use some minor quality of life things, like you mentioned, double tap the C button to quickly mute or something. Rejoining or like sending invites to additional friends after being in a game chat lobby would be nice. Also, just having the ability to send text message, I'm not going to let that go, would be nice. And just in general, like I want Switch 1 games. We talked about this. Let's get that dock profile running, and
Yeah.
then we'll be looking at a much better experience there. And then the screen. That's the only other real issue I have there. Like, let's get that patch once you figure out the system resources thing. Let it run overdrive so that we can get closer to a 10 to 15 millisecond response time on the LCD. It doesn't bother me, but at the same time, it would be nice to have it perform better if it's an option, even if it's at the cost of battery life. I don't think battery life is so bad right now where I need to be counting the minutes that I can still last on battery. But yeah, I mean, if I had to give a raw score to the Switch 2, like just reviewing it from a hardware perspective with everything that we've talked about to this point, everything it can do, everything that we've seen it do, it's a 9 out of 10 for me. I love the console. It's everything I wanted in a Switch successor. And then some. The backwards compatibility was such a pleasant surprise, just seeing how much extra power the OS allowed the system to use running those games. And again, if we can get those all 1080p without patches, even better. But just the performance standpoint alone, a lot of these games run like brand new games now. And we didn't even talk about like the Joy-Cons.
Yeah.
Like we did mention they were bigger, but like, dude, the magnetic connection is so good. It's it's so satisfying to unclip them and clip them on,
I know. I
and
hear
it
about that all the
feels
time.
solid. It's such like
Uh-huh.
it doesn't have that weird wobble. Like that I have always used like a third party controller deck for the Switch 1 where it's like one unified unit and then the tablet part of the Switch slots in so that it feels more like a single unit. I don't need to do that on the Switch 2. The Joy-Cons are good enough. They're big enough. The buttons feel good. When they're attached to the console, it doesn't feel wobbly like three things barely held together like the rails were. It's such a good experience playing in handheld mode with the controller now. Like they really got most of what they tried to do right with the Switch 2. And honestly, we're just a couple updates away from it being a perfect piece of hardware.
Yeah, for being a first of a brand new console generation, I think it's a good effort still. I love the Pro Control. We didn't even talk about that, but
Oh
the Pro
no.
Controller
And the
is
GameCube controller.
yeah. I
They're
mean,
both.
yeah,
Tell me about it. Talk to me.
yeah. The Pro Controller is awesome with that joystick. It's just a very I love the size. It's slightly smaller in footprint, but like still very comfortable. They did an excellent job with the mat. I actually kind of wish that the Switch kind of felt like that because it maybe the Switch 2 Lite they could get that feeling of the Pro Controller like physically to feel that way, that would be cool. But like I really like how the Pro Controller 2 feels in the hand. I think they did a fantastic job with the joystick, and the joystick is unlike any joystick I've ever felt, where it doesn't touch the edge and it just has a perfect
It's in a league
circular
of its own.
motion. Yeah, it's beautiful. And like I haven't tested out the Rumble. Maybe you can speak to that.
I haven't really tried it. It supposedly has an HD Rumble 2. From what I've seen from other reviewers, they say that it's not quite as good as the HD Rumble 2 that's in the Switch 2 Joy-Cons, but comparatively, like how the Switch Pro controller had way worse HD Rumble than Joy-Cons, the gap has been narrowed, according to
Okay.
them, where it is a much better experience than not having HD Rumble, but it's not quite at the same level of the Switch 2 Joy-Cons, where like that's where it was designed for. I'll definitely have to test some more things. Rumble's one of those things that I've never really cared too much about, and like in Smash Bros, for example, I always disable it because I find it a little distracting. But I'll make a concerted effort to test that out in some games that support it and see how it feels. Because I don't even know what games support HD Rumble 2 on Switch 2, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I actually don't either. I don't think anything's been. Maybe Fast RMX might have some little things there. I don't know, but I like that the paddles
Nobody talked about it.
on the paddles on the back of the Pro 2 controller, they're not like
Mhm.
in the way where like with my Steam Deck, I actually sometimes don't like to even feel how they protrude
Ugh,
so much. I don't
it's
like
so bad.
protruding. Yeah, it's like these are built in to
They're
kind of
so
it's
discreet.
like a seamless thing, right? Seamless is kind of the name of the whole entire controller, really.
Mhm.
There's not even seams on the controller. There's only one seam on the whole controller. But like,
Yeah, that's what feels different. You don't have those seams on the grips. They
yeah,
made it and designed it where all the seams are on like the front of the controller where you're not touching 100% of the time. It's
right.
such a bizarre feeling
It's bizarre because we've never felt it before.
on any controller. Like I'm Disco and talking about like Xbox and
Yeah.
PlayStation, like they've all had seams on like the sides of the controller, and while they've never bothered us before, now that we have a controller that removed them, it's like, oh my goodness, we this could have been happening the whole time. Like it actually does make a difference.
Yeah, it really does make a difference. I didn't think it would until I felt it, and I that was actually my favorite part of the whole Switch 2 was just the Pro 2 controller. I was like, this is awesome. I would need this day one if I were to play. Now, I love the GameCube controller. Don't get me wrong. I think it's fantastic. But I haven't been able to use it because I don't have a Switch 2, and so it doesn't work on stuff unless it's like connected to a PC. And I know the Blue
Yeah.
Retro adapter and the 8BitDo adapters will probably support. Um, it'll get support later, more than likely, um,
Yeah.
and I know that's being worked on for like other games because it would be cool to have other game consoles like a GameCube actually be able to use that controller, or like maybe it work with the Wii U, or like maybe modified switches or something like that, right? Like just getting it to work in other ways, and then I could play with that. But um
It is a bummer that they don't work natively on Switch 1. Like, I get that the GameCube games aren't on Switch
yeah,
1, but it
yeah,
just feels weird to make it like, oh, you can only use this controller on Switch 2. Why? Just because it has a C button?
you can
Like,
tell it's a choice
it
because
is, yeah.
yeah, and we know the obvious answer, but at the same time, it's like, well, okay, cool. You spent time giving all those older consoles virtual game key card functionality, but not like these other things that are very. It seems nebulous, but yeah, in
It's a weird
practicality.
gatekeeping decision, you
It
know?
is. It is. I mean, sure. Okay. You want me to get the new console? I get it.
Yeah,
But
we
then
get it.
even if you get it and you don't pay for Switch Online, it's not like, I mean, at least the controller works with other games, right? You still have a ZL button, which is supposed to be used in the GameCube
Yeah.
emulator app to like actually, pull up the menu. I believe that's the button for it.
Yep.
And like you can go to Mario Kart World and you can use that controller. And I think that's amazing. Let's talk about the mapping, man. I love being able to now you can actually map stuff. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I know this because I've read it, but just the fact that you can map different keys in the Nintendo Switch Online app, like being able to map stuff over is just fantastic. I think that's awesome.
Oh yeah, and you can fully map the C button. By the way, we
Yeah,
touched on it briefly earlier, but like I know a lot of people were mad, like, oh, they're paywalling a button, and that's a stupid thing. Like, come on, paywalling a button. They're also paywalling the buttons on your remote that have the Netflix and Prime Video shortcuts. They're paywalling on cell phones the phone app button because you need to pay for cell service to be able to use it. Like, that's such a dumb argument. I'm sorry, I had to go on a mini rant about that. It's the
I can
dumbest thing
feel
I've ever heard.
it.
But it is
Yeah,
fully remappable. You
yeah,
know, if you don't have Nintendo Switch Online, which probably should if you have a Switch too, but like even if you don't, or like you have a lapse because you can't afford it for a month or two, or whatever the case is, it isn't just a completely useless button. And in the case of the GameCube controller, that's actually a big deal that you can remap it because while you can use the GameCube controller in virtually every other game, the sticks do not click in. You do not have an L3 and R3 button.
right.
So by using the
Yeah.
remap button, you can actually get a full featured controller if you map L3 and R3 to the capture button, the C button, or any of the other buttons that may not be used as much and still get every button on the controller. So yeah, if you use the C and capture buttons as stand-ins for L3 and R3, you have the full suite of buttons on. No, you're missing one. You're missing the minus button because the GameCube doesn't have a select button.
Oh, wait,
So that's the one.
I guess you could use the ZL,
But
uh,
then you're getting rid of the ZL
but
button.
then you lose that. But
So you're one button short. You technically one button short. But I mean, to be honest, I don't know too many games that use both L3 and R3.
that's
It's
true.
pretty rare.
Yeah,
Even on Switch One, like
yeah.
you know, maybe clicking in the right stick would like center your camera or something, or clicking in the left stick would dash. But I can't even think of any games off the top of my head that actually use both of those. So like
I
you
can't
could get away
either.
with using the GameCube controller on I want to say like 95% of games. But we didn't get to talk about Donkey Kong yet, but we'll save that for next time.
Okay.
The only thing we can't say is it looks incredible. It's a day one purchase for me. But yeah, Switch 2, it's not perfect, but it is damn near close for being a day one or like a launch unit. 9 out of 10 for me. I can't wait to see what more we can get out of this device and what Nintendo adds to it with their updates later on.
I'm
But
excited for the
uh,
future as well. I want to see where they go with revisions. I want to see where they go with the support and how, it just gets better over time. User experience and just talking about what it's like to play some of these newer games. I'm really excited to see what we get.
yeah, me too. It's a true generational upgrade, and I couldn't be happier. But with that, I'm gonna go ahead and sign off here, Soldier. I'll let you take it away.
Thanks for everybody who made it this far. We really appreciate you for listening. And if you have anything that you'd like to share about what we talked about today, please let us know in the comments. If you have any feedback for us, we're always open to that. We can always improve. And happy gaming and thanks for joining.
Take care, everybody.